Zara was already screaming before she was fully awake. Not the kind of scream that comes from a nightmare you can shake off. This was something deeper, a sound that clawed its way out of her chest like it had been buried there for years, waiting. She sat up in the bed, her silk sheet soaked, her hands trembling, and her eyes wide and searching the dark room for something she couldn't name. Jin-Ho was not beside her. He was standing at the window. Still dressed. Jacket on. Like he had never come to bed at all. The city glittered 40 floors below him, indifferent and cold, and he stood against it like a shadow that had grown too large for the room. He did not turn around when she gasped. He did not move when she pressed her hand to her chest trying to slow her own heartbeat. He just stood there, and the silence between them was the loudest thing Zara had ever heard. Jin-Ho. Her voice was hoarse. How long have you been standing there? Long enough, he said. She swallowed. Was I talking again? He turned then. Slowly. And the look on his face was not anger. It was something colder than anger. Something that had already moved past fury into a place she did not recognize and could not read. He looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he has already decided to solve. You said his name, Jin-Ho said. 3 times. Zara opened her mouth. Closed it. She had no defense ready because she had no explanation ready. This had been happening for 2 weeks. The sleep talking. The dreams she couldn't hold on to when she woke up. The name that kept escaping her lips in the dark like a confession she never agreed to make. I don't remember what I dream, she said. You know that. I know what I heard. He walked toward the bed slowly, each step deliberate, and stopped just short of her side. He looked down at her and she looked up at him, and there was an entire war happening in that silence. They sung, he said quietly, like saying the name itself was something he had to force through gritted teeth. Who is he, Zara? Her stomach dropped. Jin-Ho. I am not asking again. She pressed her lips together. The honest answer was complicated. The complicated answer was dangerous. And Zara had spent 3 years building a life with this man specifically by being careful about what she said and how she said it. Jin-Ho Kwon did not do complicated. He did not do gray areas. He was a man who operated in decisions, and every decision he made carried weight that lesser men could not carry. He was someone I knew a long time ago, she said carefully. Before you. Before any of this. He died, Jin-Ho. 5 years ago. I don't know why I keep saying his name. I don't even think about him anymore. Jin-Ho stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, adjusted his cufflink, and walked out of the bedroom without another word. Zara sat in the dark for a long time after the door clicked shut. If you are watching this story for the first time, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now because stories like this one drop every single week and you do not want to miss what happens next. She told herself he believed her. She told herself the conversation was over. She was wrong on both counts. 3 days passed. Jin-Ho was polite. Attentive, even. He had breakfast sent to her in the mornings. He asked about her schedule. He kissed her forehead before he left for his meetings. But something had shifted in the architecture of his behavior, something small and structural that Zara could feel but not point to. Like a crack in a wall that hasn't broken through yet but has already decided it will. On the 4th day, Zara felt sick. Not anxious sick. Not stressed sick. Physically, genuinely, violently sick. She barely made it to the bathroom in time and afterwards sat on the cold marble floor thinking it must be something she ate. She drank ginger tea. She lay down. By evening she felt worse, not better, and by the following morning it had happened again. Her private doctor came to the penthouse on day 6. He was a quiet man named Dr. Stein who asked few questions and kept clean records and understood that working for people like Jin-Ho Kwon meant discretion was not a courtesy, it was a requirement. He ran the standard checks. He asked her the standard questions. And then he went very quiet in a way that was not standard at all. Zara, he said slowly, setting down his pen. When was your last cycle? She thought about it. Then she thought harder. And then a cold feeling started in her stomach that had nothing to do with nausea. Doctor, she said. What are you about to tell me? He looked at her with the careful, measured expression of a man choosing every word like he was diffusing something. You are approximately 6 weeks pregnant, he said. The room tilted. Zara did not speak for a full minute. She sat on the edge of the examination table Dr. Stein had set up in the guest room and she stared at the wall in front of her and she did the math. She did it once. Then she did it again because the first answer couldn't be right. Then she did it a third time and the answer was still the same and the cold feeling in her stomach turned into something closer to terror. 6 weeks. Jin-Ho had been gone for 4 months. A long operation, he had called it. Business that required his physical presence in locations he never named. He had come back 3 weeks ago and she had been so relieved to have him home that she hadn't thought about the calendar, hadn't thought about anything except that the penthouse finally felt inhabited again. 4 months away. 3 weeks back. 6 weeks pregnant. That's not possible, she whispered. The test is accurate, Dr. Stein said gently. I ran it twice. Run it again. Zara. Run it again, please. He did. They waited in silence. The result did not change. Zara pressed both hands flat against her thighs and breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth and tried to think. Tried to organize the facts into something that made sense. There had to be an explanation. There was always an explanation. She was a woman who had survived things that should have broken her and she had survived them by staying logical, by staying calm, by refusing to let emotion drive the car. But logic was not helping her right now. Is there any medical reason, she said slowly, any condition, any factor that could make the timeline appear different from what it actually is? Dr. Stein paused. It was a small pause, barely a second, but Zara caught it. There are rare conditions, he said carefully, that can affect how conception dating is calculated. Irregular implantation. Hormonal anomalies. In certain unusual cases the standard dating method can be off by several weeks. He folded his hands. It is not common. But it is not impossible. Zara looked at him. How many weeks off are we talking? Potentially 4. Maybe 5. She exhaled slowly. That still didn't fully close the gap. But it cracked the door open just enough to breathe through. I need you to say nothing, she said. To no one. Not until I understand what is happening. Dr. Stein nodded. Of course. But even as he said it, Zara knew that information in Jin-Ho's world had a way of traveling without permission. Nothing stayed contained forever. Secrets in this penthouse had a lifespan and she had no idea how much time this one had left. She called her best friend Mina that afternoon. Mina was the only person from Zara's life before Jin-Ho who had survived the transition into her life after him. Everyone else had drifted or been quietly discouraged from staying close. But Mina was stubborn in the specific way that good friends are stubborn and Jin-Ho had tolerated her because Zara needed at least one person who knew her whole story. They met in the building's private lounge, a room Jin-Ho had designed for exactly this kind of conversation, soundproofed, camera-free, intimate. He had built it for himself but Zara had claimed it years ago for moments like this one. Mina listened without interrupting. That was one of her best qualities. She sat across from Zara with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea and she let Zara talk until there was nothing left to say. Then she set the cup down. 6 weeks, Mina said. 6 weeks. And he's been back 3. Yes. Mina was quiet for a moment. Zara. The sleep talking. The name you keep saying. She leaned forward. Is there any chance at all, that Daesung is not as gone as you think he is? Zara's jaw tightened. He died in a fire, Mina. I identified his belongings myself. His jacket. His watch. The ring he wore on his right hand. You identified his belongings, Mina said quietly. Not him. The room felt smaller suddenly. Zara had told herself that story so many times over 5 years that it had become solid in her mind, load-bearing, something she had built her ability to move forward on top of. Daesung was gone. She had grieved him, buried the grief, and chosen a new life. That was the story. That was the only version of events she had allowed herself to hold. But Mina's words had just put a crack in the wall. He's dead, Zara said. But her voice was not as steady as it had been 60 seconds ago. Mina reached across and took her hand. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to make sure you have all your armor on before Jin-Ho comes home tonight. Because if his people find out about that pregnancy before you tell him yourself. I know, Zara said. He will hear the worst version of the story first. I know, Mina. And you know what he does when he hears the worst version first. Zara said nothing. She didn't need to. They both knew. Jin-Ho Kwon was not a man who waited for context. He was a man who acted on information and asked questions later, and the questions he asked later were usually delivered in rooms without windows. Zara went home and stood in the closet for a long time staring at a row of clothes she hadn't touched in years. Old things. Things from before. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. She wasn't sure she was looking for anything. But her hands moved without instruction and she pulled a box from the top shelf and opened it, and inside was everything she had kept from the life she lived before Jin-Ho found her. Old photographs. A dried flower from a birthday she barely remembered. Letters she had written but never sent. And at the very bottom, folded inside a jacket she had not touched in 5 years, something that had not been there before. An envelope. Unsealed. Her name written on the front in handwriting she recognized before she was conscious of recognizing it. Handwriting that made her fingers go cold and her breath go shallow and every logical, controlled, armor-plated part of her brain begin to scream. She opened it. The note inside was short. 4 lines. You are not losing your mind. The dreams are real. The name you keep saying is not a ghost. Do not tell Jin-Ho anything yet. I will find you. It was signed with a single initial. D. Zara sat down on the closet floor because her legs stopped walking. Daesung was alive. She sat on that closet floor for 40 minutes. She counted because it gave her something to do with her mind while the rest of her came apart. 40 minutes of staring at 4 lines of handwriting and trying to reconcile the world she had built with the world that note was suggesting existed underneath it. 40 minutes of Daesung being dead and then not dead and then dead again because her brain kept rejecting the alternative the way a body rejects something foreign. Then she stood up. Folded the note. Put it inside her bra where no search would find it without her knowing. Walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on her face, looked at herself in the mirror for a long time, and made a decision. She was going to find out the truth before Jin-Ho found it first. She started with what she had. The fire had happened 5 years ago in a warehouse district on the edge of the city. Daesung had been working late. The building went up fast, too fast, the kind of fast that investigators note in their reports with careful neutral language that means they suspect accelerant but cannot prove it. 3 people were confirmed dead. Daesung was listed among them based on personal effects recovered from the scene. Zara had never pushed for more than that. She had been 22 and devastated, and someone had handed her a box of his things and told her he was gone, and she had believed them because she had needed to believe them. Because the alternative, that someone had deliberately staged his death, required a context she didn't have at 22. She had that context now. She called a man named Theo. Not a name she used often. Theo existed in the narrow corridor between Jin-Ho's ward and the legitimate ward, a man who found information that official channels wouldn't touch and charged accordingly and kept his mouth shut about his clients as a matter of professional survival. Zara had used him twice before, both times with Jin-Ho's knowledge. This time she did not mention Jin-Ho at all. I need everything on a warehouse fire from 5 years ago, she said. And I need it before my husband gets home tonight. Theo didn't ask why. That was why she paid him well. She was sitting in the private lounge when Jin-Ho came home at 7. She heard his footsteps in the hallway. She had memorized the rhythm of them years ago, an unconscious survival instinct, and she arranged her face into something neutral before the door opened. He looked tired. Which for Jin-Ho meant he looked exactly the same as always but with slightly less light behind his eyes. He loosened his tie, poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, and sat across from her in the armchair that had become his chair the way that certain things become certain people's things without discussion. "How was your day?" she asked. "Productive." He swallowed the glass. "Yours?" "Quiet." He looked at her. Not the casual glance of a man making conversation. The other look. The one that meant he was reading something in her face that she hadn't intended to leave there. "You seem tense," he said. "I'm tired," she said. "The nausea is back." Something moved across his expression. Too quick to catch fully, but she felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. He set the glass down. "You should see Dr. Stein," he said. "I already did," she said, and the words were out before she could stop them, and now there was no pulling them back. The room went very still. "And?" Jin-Ho said. Zara looked at her husband. This man who had walked into her life like a door opening onto something vast and unknowable. This man who had chosen her specifically, deliberately, out of every option available to him, and had built a world around that choice. This man whose love was not soft or simple but was absolute in the way that mountains are absolute, unmovable and capable of causing enormous damage if you were standing in the wrong place when it shifted. She thought about the note in her bra. She thought about Mina's voice saying you know what he does when he hears the worst version first. She thought about 6 weeks and 4 months and a name she kept saying in her sleep. "I'm pregnant," she said. Jin-Ho did not move. Not a flinch. Not a blink. Not the small involuntary physical responses that most human beings cannot suppress when they receive information that detonates something inside them. He was utterly, completely still, and that stillness was the most frightening thing Zara had ever sat across from. "How far along?" he said. His voice was completely flat. "The doctor said 6 weeks. But he also said there are conditions that can affect the dating. That the real timeline could be different by several weeks." She kept her voice steady. She had rehearsed this. "Jin-Ho, I have never been unfaithful to you. Not once. Not ever. Whatever the numbers look like, I need you to hear me say that." He stood up. She fought the instinct to lean back. He walked to the window. The same window he had stood at 3 nights ago while she was still trembling from her dream. He put one hand on the glass and looked out at the city and said nothing for so long that Zara started counting again just to stay anchored. "Beck," he said finally. Zara's stomach clenched. Beck was Jin-Ho's head of security. Calling Beck's name in a quiet voice in a quiet room was the equivalent of another man raising his fist. "Jin-Ho, I am not talking to you right now," he said. Still quiet. Still terrifyingly calm. "I am thinking." "Then think about what I just told you." "I have never." "You have been saying another man's name in your sleep for 2 weeks." He turned from the window and looked at her, and for the first time she saw something in his face that wasn't cold control. It was pain. Raw and deep and quickly buried, but she saw it and it broke something open in her chest. You have been saying his name and you told me he was dead and now you are sitting in front of me pregnant and I am supposed to do what, Zara? I am supposed to simply accept the mathematics of this. I am telling you the truth. You told me he was dead. He is dead. Then why does his name live in your mouth while you sleep? She had no answer for that. Not one she could give him yet. Not without the note. Not without more. Jin-Ho straightened. Adjusted his jacket. Picked up his glass and finished the whiskey and set it down with a precision that meant the conversation was not over, it was simply being moved somewhere else. I will find out everything, he said quietly. You understand that? There is nothing in this city I cannot find out. I know, she said. So if there is something you are not telling me, he said, and he looked at her one more time with those eyes that had never once failed to see straight through her, now is the time. Zara held his gaze. The note pressed against her skin. There is nothing, she said. He nodded slowly. And walked out. Theo called 20 minutes later. The fire was set, he said without preamble. Accelerant confirmed in the original investigation, buried in a secondary report that never made the official file. 3 bodies recovered. 2 confirmed by dental records. The third, he paused. The third was never formally identified. Listed as Daesung Cho based on personal effects. No dental match. No DNA confirmation. Zara closed her eyes. Who buried the secondary report, she asked. That, Theo said carefully, is where it gets complicated. The instruction to suppress came from inside a network I recognize. It's the same network your husband dismantled 2 years ago. A rival faction. They were running operations in that district 5 years ago. The fire was theirs. Why would they fake his death? I don't know yet. But I know they were running something in that warehouse before it burned. Something chemical. Something they didn't want anyone looking too closely at. Zara sat with that information settling over her like cold water. A rival faction. A fake death. A chemical operation. And Daesung, who had been a biochemistry graduate when she knew him, who had been brilliant and quiet and curious in the specific way that made dangerous people want to use brilliant, quiet, curious people. The pieces were assembling themselves into a picture she wasn't ready to look at directly yet. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Roof garden. Midnight. Come alone. Please. She knew before she even finished reading it. Zara told herself she wasn't going. She told herself that at 9 o'clock while she sat at the vanity pretending to take off her makeup. She told herself that at 10 while she lay in the bed staring at the ceiling listening to Jin-Ho's voice moving through the walls of his office down the corridor, low and controlled, talking to someone she couldn't identify about something she couldn't hear. She told herself that at 11:15 when the penthouse finally went quiet and the strip of light under the office door disappeared and the whole building settled into the particular silence of a place where dangerous people sleep. At 11:50 she was in the elevator going up. The roof garden was Jin-Ho's one concession to softness. He had designed it himself, rare plants, clean stone pathways, a small water feature that ran even in winter. He came up here sometimes alone and Zara had learned early in their marriage not to follow him when he did. This was the place where Jin-Ho Kwon allowed himself to be something other than what the world required of him. She had always respected that boundary. Tonight she was breaking it for a different reason entirely. The roof door opened and the cold night air hit her face and she stepped out and scanned the dark and for a moment saw nothing and thought maybe she had been wrong, maybe it was someone else, maybe she had let hope override logic and made a dangerous mistake coming up here alone at midnight while her husband slept 2 floors below. Then a figure stepped out from behind the tall hedgerow at the far end of the garden. And Zara's leg stopped working for the second time in one day. He was thinner. That was the first thing she noticed. Thinner and harder and older in the specific way that men get older when they have been living in the dark for a long time. His hair was different. His jaw carried a tension it hadn't carried when he was 24 and laughing in a small apartment with her and talking about the future like it was something they could simply decide to have. But it was him. It was Daesung. "Zara," he said. His voice was the same. That was almost worse. Everything else had changed, but his voice was exactly the same, and it reached inside her chest and pulled something loose that she had spent 5 years pressing down. She crossed the roof in 10 steps and stopped just short of him and looked at him for a long moment, and then she hit him. Open palm, hard, across the left side of his face. His head snapped to the side and he took it without flinching, and when he turned back to look at her, his eyes were full of something that looked a lot like the specific guilt of a person who knows they deserve worse. 5 years, she said. Her voice was shaking. 5 years, Daesung. I thought you were dead. I grieved you. I buried you in my mind and I moved on and built an entire life, and you were alive this whole time and you said nothing. I couldn't, he said. I couldn't contact you. If I had contacted you, they would have found me through you and they would have used you to get to me, and I could not. He stopped. Exhaled. I could not let them touch you, Zara. That was the only thing I was sure of through all of it. Who are they? He looked at her carefully. How much do you know about what your husband does? Enough, she said. Tell me who they are. A faction called the Grimm Collective, he said. They were operating in the district where I worked 5 years ago. I was doing postgraduate research, atmospheric compounds, neurological applications, completely legitimate academic work. They approached me and I said no, and 2 weeks later my lab was on fire and I was supposed to be inside it. He paused. Someone pulled me out. I didn't know who at the time. I woke up in a safe house with a new identity and a message that said stay dead or they finish the job. Zara stared at him. Who pulled you out? Daesung looked at her for a long moment and the answer was in his eyes before he said it, and she already knew what he was going to say and she still wasn't ready to hear it. Jin-Ho, he said. The water feature ran quietly in the dark beside them. That's not possible, she said. He knew about us, Daesung said. I don't know how. I don't know when he started watching or why, but he knew who I was before he ever met you. He pulled me out of that fire because the Grimm Collective was a rival network he was already moving against, and I was a resource he wanted to preserve. He gave me a safe house and a cover, and for 3 years I worked for him indirectly, kept off the books, developing countermeasures to the collective's operations. And then what? Zara's voice was barely above a whisper. And then 6 months ago the collective found a way to reactivate a compound I had developed years ago. An atmospheric neurological agent, something I built for therapeutic research that they had stolen and weaponized. It works through airborne exposure. Prolonged contact affects sleep architecture, causes vivid recurring dream states, and in women with a specific hormonal profile. He stopped. Zara felt the air leave her lungs. Daesung, she said slowly. What does it do in women with a specific hormonal profile? He met her eyes. It can trigger conception outside of normal circumstance. It essentially overrides certain biological signals. The effects mimic natural processes so closely that standard medical testing cannot distinguish the difference. He swallowed. The collective released it through the ventilation system of this building 6 weeks ago. They were targeting Jin-Ho, trying to destabilize him. But you were the one who absorbed the highest concentration because you spend more time in the residential floors than he does. Everything clicked into place at once. The sleep talking. The dreams she couldn't hold on to when she woke. The pregnancy that didn't match any timeline. The nausea that arrived without warning. Her body had been responding to something external, something introduced into her environment without her knowledge or consent, and the cruelest part of it was that the compound had reached into her unconscious mind and pulled out the name of the person most deeply buried there and put it on her lips every night while she slept. She hadn't been betraying Jin-Ho in her sleep. She had been poisoned. The baby, she said. Her hand went to her stomach without deciding to. Is the baby healthy? Daesung said quickly. The compound does not harm the pregnancy once established. I made sure of that the moment I understood what had happened. I have been monitoring the exposure levels for weeks. That is why I came back. Not for you, not like that, Zara. I came back because my work was used to hurt you, and that is something I cannot live with. Zara turned away from him, walked to the edge of the roof and put both hands on the railing and looked out at the city and breathed. In. Out. In. Out. The lights blurred slightly. She refused to cry. She had cried enough for this man years ago, and she was not going to do it again on a rooftop in the middle of the night while her husband slept downstairs with no idea that the architecture of his carefully controlled world was cracking from multiple directions at once. He's going to find out you're here, she said. I know. His people are already looking into the pregnancy. Into me. Into everything. She turned back to face him. Beck will find you before morning if you're not careful. Beck already knows I'm here, Daesung said quietly. Zara froze. Beck works for Jin-Ho, Daesung said. But he has known about my arrangement for 3 years. Jin-Ho built in a failsafe. If I ever needed to surface, Beck was the contact. I reached out to Beck 4 days ago. He told me to wait. To let things develop. He paused. I think Jin-Ho already knows more than he has shown you. The cold feeling was back. Deeper this time. Then why, Zara said carefully, is Jin-Ho acting like a man who believes his wife has been unfaithful? Why is he sitting in his office at midnight building a case against me if he already has the pieces? Daesung looked at her with an expression that was equal parts pity and honesty. Because knowing the facts and trusting your wife are 2 different things, he said. And Jin-Ho Kwon has never in his life allowed himself to simply trust anyone. Not completely. Not without proof that the trust has been tested and held. He looked at her steadily. I think this is the test, Zara. I think he is waiting to see what you do with it. A sound behind her. She spun around. Jin-Ho was standing in the doorway of the roof garden. Jacket on. Perfectly still. Eyes moving from Zara to Daesung and back again with the slow, deliberate precision of a man who has already decided he is not going to react until he has seen everything there is to see. The 3 of them stood in a triangle on that rooftop, and the city hummed 40 floors below, and nobody said anything for what felt like a very long time. Then Jin-Ho stepped forward into the light. I think, he said quietly, it is time for all 3 of us to have a conversation. Nobody moved for a long moment. The wind cut across the roof garden and the water feature kept running, and somewhere far below a car horn sounded and faded, and the city continued being indifferent the way cities always are when the lives inside them are coming apart at the seams. Zara stood between the 2 men and felt the specific terror of a person who has been navigating a burning building and just realized both exits lead to fire. Jin-Ho walked past her. Not toward her. Past her. He walked directly to Daesung and stopped 2 feet in front of him and looked at him the way a man looks at something he has been carrying in his mind for a very long time and is finally seeing with his own eyes. Daesung held his ground. That surprised Zara. Most people took a step back when Jin-Ho walked toward them with that expression. Daesung stood still and met his eyes, and whatever passed between them in that moment was something Zara could feel but not decipher. You look terrible, Jin-Ho said. Daesung exhaled a short breath that was almost a laugh. 5 years in hiding would do that. I told Beck to bring you in 2 days ago, Jin-Ho said. You ignored the message. I needed to talk to her first, Daesung said. She deserved to hear it from me. Jin-Ho turned and looked at Zara. Really looked at her. And what she saw in his face in that moment was not the cold, controlled mask he wore through everything. It was something underneath the mask. Something exhausted and human and quietly devastated in the way that proud men get devastated, silently, behind everything, where they think nobody can see it. How much did he tell you? Jin-Ho asked her. Enough, she said. The compound. The collective. The ventilation system. She paused. That you pulled him out of the fire? Jin-Ho nodded slowly. He walked to the stone bench near the water feature and sat down, and for a moment he just looked at his own hands. It was the most unguarded she had ever seen him, and it frightened her more than his anger had because she didn't know the rules for this version of him. Sit down, he said. Both of you. They sat. Jin-Ho was quiet for a moment. Then he began to talk. 5 years ago, the Grim Collective was the biggest obstacle between me and control of this city's underground network, he said. They were ruthless and they were smart and they had resources I didn't fully understand yet. When I found out they were running a chemical operation in the East District, I had my people investigate. That investigation led me to a researcher they had tried to recruit. He glanced at Daesung. When they tried to eliminate him, I made a decision. I pulled him out and I kept him close because his knowledge of their operations was more valuable than anything else I had access to. You never told me any of this, Zara said. There was nothing to tell, Jin-Ho said. He was an asset. A protected resource. I did not know he was connected to you until 6 months into our marriage when I found an old photograph in a box you kept on the top shelf of the closet. His jaw tightened slightly. A photograph of the two of you. Young. Happy. He said the last word like it had an edge on it. I ran his name through my records and understood immediately who he was. Zara stared at him. You knew for 2 years. Yes. And you said nothing. What would I have said? He looked at her directly. That I was keeping your dead first love in a safe house on the other side of the city. That the man you mourned was alive because I decided he was useful to me. He shook his head. There was no version of that conversation that ended well. So instead she stopped. Pressed her fingers to her temple. You just carried it. I carry many things, he said quietly. Daesung leaned forward. Jin-Ho. The collective's reactivation of the compound. Do you understand the full scope of what they deployed? My team has been analyzing the ventilation samples for 4 days, Jin-Ho said. I understand exactly what they deployed. I understand what it does. And I understand, he stopped. Something moved through his expression. I understand that what happened to Zara was not a choice she made. It was something done to her without her knowledge or consent. The words landed in the space between all three of them, and Zara felt something in her chest loosen that had been worn tight for days. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear him say it out loud. Not imply it. Not navigate around it with careful language. Say it plainly the way Jin-Ho said things when he had decided something was true and was done debating it. The baby is mine, Jin-Ho said. It was not a question. The compound manipulated the dating, Daesung said. The actual conception aligns with your return. The 6-week calculation is a biological artifact of the exposure. The baby is yours. Jin-Ho nodded once. Like a man filing a document. Then he looked at Zara and his face did something she had seen it do only twice before in 3 years of marriage. It opened. Just slightly. Just enough for her to see inside. I owe you an apology, he said. She blinked. What? I sat in the corner of our bedroom and watched you wake up from a nightmare, and the first thing I did was interrogate you about a name. He held her gaze. You were frightened and disoriented and I made it worse. That was not, he paused. The word seemed to cost him something. That was not how I want to be with you. Zara looked at this man. This impossible, controlled, frightening, complicated man who had built walls so high around himself that she sometimes forgot there was something living inside them. And she felt the specific kind of love that only exists for people who have seen each other at their worst and decided to stay anyway. Not easy love. Not simple love. The kind that has weight and history and scars. You were scared, she said softly. His jaw walked. I don't get scared. Jin-Ho. A bit. I was scared, he said quietly. The roof was very still. Daesung stood up slowly. He looked at both of them and his expression was the complicated mixture of someone who has loved a person, lost them, found them again, and understood with complete clarity that they belong to someone else now and that this is correct and right even though it costs something. I should go, he said. You're not going anywhere, Jin-Ho said. And then, at Daesung's expression, something almost imperceptible shifted in his voice. Not warmth exactly, but the absence of coldness. The collective reactivated your compound because they want you surfaced and visible. The moment you walk out of this building without protection, you are exactly where they want you. He stood. You will stay in the East Wing until we have dismantled whatever infrastructure they rebuilt. After that you are free to go wherever you choose. Daesung stared at him. Why? Jin-Ho adjusted his cuff. Because you loved her before I did, he said simply. That means you protect her too. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Daesung nodded. Slow and genuine and carrying the full weight of everything the three of them had just moved through together. He looked at Zara one last time and in his eyes she saw the 24-year-old she had loved and the 30-year-old he had become and the goodbye that they should have had 5 years ago and never got. She let herself feel it. All of it. For exactly 10 seconds. Then she let it go. Good night, Daesung, she said. Good night, Zara, he said. He walked to the roof door and pulled it open and stepped through and it closed behind him and he was gone and this time it didn't feel like death. It felt like a door closing softly on something that had been finished for a long time and just needed the right moment to be acknowledged. Jin-Ho stood beside her. She leaned into him. Not dramatically. Just sideways, her shoulder against his arm, her head tilting toward him slightly. He was still for a moment the way he was always still when something emotional arrived without warning and he had to recalibrate around it. Then his arm came around her shoulders. Slowly. Like a man remembering how to do something he had been afraid to do for a while. They stood like that for a long time looking out over the city. The baby, Zara said quietly. Is ours, he said. Are you? She stopped. Started again. Are you happy about it? Another long pause. She had learned to wait through his pauses. They always led somewhere worth arriving at. I don't know yet how to be happy about things, he said. I am still learning. His arm tightened slightly around her shoulders. But I know that I want it. And I know that I want you. And for now that is enough to build on. She exhaled slowly. That's enough, she agreed. Below them the city moved and paused and went about its business. Somewhere inside the building Daesung was being shown to the East Wing. Somewhere across the city the Grim Collective was building something that Jin-Ho's network would spend the next several weeks dismantling piece by piece. Somewhere in a file on Dr. Stein's encrypted drive a set of test results were waiting to be revised in light of new medical information. And on a rooftop garden 40 floors above all of it a woman who had been poisoned and doubted and frightened and tested stood inside the arm of a man who had been closed and calculating and scared in all the ways that powerful people are scared, and they stood together in the dark and breathed the same cold air and neither of them said anything else because sometimes the most important thing two people can do is simply remain. Zara slept peacefully that night for the first time in 2 weeks. No dreams. No name spoken into the darkness. No cold weight pressing against her chest when she woke. Just the slow steady rhythm of Jin-Ho breathing beside her and the city quiet outside the window and the particular piece of a person who has walked through fire and come out the other side still standing and still whole and still loved. Some secrets are not betrayals. Some are simply truths that were not yet ready to be told. And some of the most dangerous men in any room turn out to be the ones most capable of mercy when it matters most. The end. If this story kept you glued from the very first second to the very last word, then you already know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story, and drop a comment below telling me which moment hit you hardest. Was it the rooftop? The note in the closet? Or Jin-Ho finally letting his walls come down? I read every single comment and your responses genuinely shaped the next story. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. See you in the next one.